released in November 1995. Killer Instinct for the Game Boy. So that's what we're talking about today. Some portable Killer Instinct. Just recently repicked up this cartridge off of eBay. Wouldn't boot up initially. Had to open her up. It looked like somebody dropped this cartridge in the toilet and it was stewing around for about a year or two. So got that bad boy working. Decided, you know what? Let's go ahead and check her out. So popped her in. Turned her on. She works. Time to check out portable Killer Instinct on the Game Boy. So let's get this party started. So yeah, Killer Instinct. Such an amazing game back in the day. Obviously, it was originally an arcade game. It was released in the fall of '94. Man, I just remember like it was yesterday going to the arcade, because I loved going into the arcades back in the day. And, you know, this new game that's sitting there, you know, I wasn't somebody who just like walk up to people like, hey, what's going on over here? But there was such a huge crowd around this machine. And it was loud. It was like the arcade had it blasting and all the other games were like low, and you just hear Combo Breaker and just this crazy awesome music, and you're like, what the heck is this? Let me get off of Mortal Kombat. Let me get off of Street Fighter. Let me go check this nonsense out. And you get over there and it's just tons of people around. And if you remember back in the day, you know, to say that you were next in the arcade, you would put a quarter up on the screen or wherever. And, you know, I'm looking, I'm like, holy crap, you know, there's quarters, like, literally all over the place. Like, everybody was like, it's, you know, I'm next, dude, next. I got next. Just throwing up their quarter, I got next. I'm like, oh, man, I got to play this. This, wow. You're sitting there watching it, the pre-rendered graphics, the crazy sounds and music, just so awesome at the time. You know, you know, Killer Instinct did some things differently than other fighting games, but essentially it took a lot of what other fighting games were doing and kind of took all the best from multiple games and franchises and whatnot, and kind of combined it and made it their own and changed a lot of things up. So, you know, an example of that would be, instead of like, you know, 2 matches out of 3, who's the winner, they did, you have 2 life bars. That's it. Defeat your enemy, the, you know, second player or the computer, defeat their you know, 2 life bars and you win. So that was a little different. I don't want to say Killer Instinct was, you know, the creator of combos, but this is my opinion. Killer Instinct is the game that did it right and propelled the fighting game genre to a whole new direction with that. So Killer Instinct, very combo driven game. Simplified combos though, because there were auto combos where it was just a few button presses would get like a crazy combo going. There's still a lot of strategy and depth to it, but it was pretty simple and very friendly to newcomers to jump in and be able to just, you know, whoop some ass in Killer Instinct. You know, there was, you know, finishing moves reminiscent of fatalities, you know, ultra combos. You could break up your combos with, you know, combo breakers. Just, you know, that voice, ultra combo, it's just amazing stuff. So, you know, it was released in '94 in the arcade, and then the following year they released it on the Super Nintendo and on the Game Boy. You know, still using those pre-rendered graphics that Silicon Graphics had done, you know, doing a downscaled version of that. The Super Nintendo version, my God, it was just, and I've said this so many times, to get a game like that at home that you were playing in the arcade and were amazed by, was just, it was a dream come true. Loved it on the Super Nintendo. But the Game Boy, I still loved my Game Boy at that time. And to have an awesome fighter like this on the Game Boy on the go was just killer. It was Killer Instinct. It was just amazing. So, you know, the Super Nintendo version, very reminiscent and similar to the arcade. The Game Boy version, very similar as well, but there, obviously the system was very limited. The graphics still looked amazing for the Game Boy. Obviously you can't touch the Super Nintendo or arcade or Nintendo 64 ports. Not gonna touch that, but still to have an awesome arcade fighter on your Game Boy on the go, was just awesome at the time. The game had to make some sacrifices due to limitations, obviously. The Game Boy only has 2 buttons, so essentially, you know, depending on how you're pressing your directions would register your punch or kick button differently. So it was still pretty cool. I think they kind of did the same thing for other fighters on the Game Boy. And then with that as well, obviously the graphics had to be downgraded. The backgrounds had to be downgraded. They cut out 2 characters. Cinder and Riptor were cut from the Game Boy version, unfortunately. But still awesome that they only cut 2 characters instead of, you know, only, you know, putting in like 4 characters or something. So that was still cool. The other thing with this that was pretty awesome, but it kind of depended, I guess. If you had this on the Super Nintendo, it didn't matter in my opinion, but if you had a Super Game Boy and you threw this cartridge on your Super Game Boy, it had this color palette, like as if you played it on the Game Boy Color, would have the same color palette. So a little custom color palette. But on the Super Game Boy on your Super Nintendo, you could plug in a second player controller and play 2 players on that screen without having to do a Game Link thing. So that was kind of cool. But, you know, if you're playing it on the Super Game Boy, you might as well have been playing it on the Super Nintendo, the Super Nintendo release, get the awesome graphics. This is more of on the go. Let's do this, go out and play some Killer Instinct. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and check this out, play a couple quick matches, you know, give my impression on how this controls and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my girl Orchid. That's where it's at. I've always loved using Orchid. You know, I never really play fighting games and learn all the characters. I usually find 1 or 2 that I really like, and for Killer Instinct, Orchid was one of them. And as you can see, you could still pull off your combos. Pretty awesome. Yeah, the graphics aren't amazing, but for me, they hold up pretty dang well for a Game Boy game. You know, looking at it on the big screen, it doesn't look as good to me as it does on the physical Game Boy. But it's still pretty awesome. You know, I wouldn't be playing this on the big screen other than, you know, to do a little impression on, you know, a video here. You know, this game, I'll play it on the actual Game Boy hardware just because, you know, I still enjoy playing Game Boy games, and it's an awesome fighter on the Game Boy, probably the best. Let's see if I can get this full and do some kind of finishing move. Let's see. Come on. You know, the game still has that speed, cut down a little bit, obviously, but it's still a pretty quick fighter. Oh my god, he's gonna get me. He got me. What? Weak sauce. Weak sauce. Yeah, let me go ahead and continue once. Let me go ahead and give this another go. Jeez, unbelievable. But you know, fighting games, you know, most of them have stories, but stories are pretty weak. Killer Instinct is no different, but people don't really play fighting games for the stories so much. But Killer Instinct, if memory serves me properly, it's essentially there's a mega corporation. You know, a lot of games have the similar storyline, but there's a mega corporation. They host this big tournament, this big fighting tournament, and they have these like almost like bioengineered fighting soldier creature type things that they want to test out, so they throw them into the tournament. And you know, this company can also open up, I guess, rifts to like got him can open up rifts to like a whole other dimension, and they pull out Idol, you know, and he's the end boss. Dang, I couldn't do my move. Oh well. But yeah, they open up this rift, pull out Idol, and he's the last boss. You know, he is the last boss in the Game Boy version as well. As you see him up there, little 2-headed mutant monster type dude. But overall, you know, the Game Boy version, it's one of my favorite Game Boy games of all time. You know, there's a handful of Game Boy games that I just love to this day, and I still have to own them. And this is one of them. Just really love it. You know, I'll probably be doing some more videos on my favorite classic Game Boy games. You know, but if there's a game that you remember on the Game Boy that was awesome, throw it out there. Put a comment out there. Let me know. Maybe it's something I need to check out. Maybe it's something I've forgotten all about. But throw that out there. Smash that like button if you could. If you're a subscriber, I really appreciate it. If you're not a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button as well. Really would appreciate that. So I appreciate everything you guys do for me, watching my videos, throwing out your comments, suggestions, recommendations, and please do that. Throw out some Game Boy games I should check out. With that said, catch you guys next time. Boom!